There was only one name in shooting that tested the mettle of diehard shmup fans in the 80s and 90s, and if you don't know it by now, well, where have you been? We've looked at a few Toaplan games on Bullet Heaven so far: the ubiquitous Tiger Heli, the somewhat obscure Dai Senpu, a somewhat controversial take on Hellfire, the Zero Wing no one played. Of the many Toaplan games we've amassed over the years though, TRUXTON is perhaps the best known outside of that one about all the bases and how they belong to some cat. Sure, we all know the earlier YouTube video and the memes that came from it, and longtime viewers know my stance on those. And with that in mind, I've wanted to make a far more respectful feature on the matter for over a decade now, and following in the footsteps of the Daiojo dynasty, I think it's time to do so in a very Mudprints way. In this episode of Bullet Heaven, we're taking a look at TATSUJIN and TRUXTON on Everything I've Got. TATSUJIN is a Tate vertical shooter developed by Toaplan and released to arcades in October 1988 by Taito in Japan and Europe and Midway in North America. In Japan, its title translates literally to expert or master, which is fitting given its legendary difficulty, but in the West it would be renamed TRUXTON, which is a bit confusing. There are a bunch of places called TRUXTON found in Arizona, Missouri, New York, but I don't know if that fits. Maybe it draws its name from the Cold War era nuclear-powered cruiser USS TRUXTON, with a U though. Designated CGN-35, USS TRUXTON was named for Thomas Truxtun of the US Revolutionary War, and was the fifth of 6 vessels bestowed the name at that. That's just a thought, but I mean, its motto was skillful navigation, faithfulness, power. Anyway, numerous ports and conversions have been made available over the years since its 1988 arcade debut, starting with TATSUJIN on the Mega Drive in Japan and TRUXTON on the Sega Genesis in North America, both in 1989. It would then see release to the Mega Drive in Europe in 1990, once again as TRUXTON. TATSUJIN would also later be ported by Sting Entertainment in 1992 and published to the PC Engine by Taito exclusively in Japan. Sentiments vary wildly on this particular version, but one thing is certain, it's not especially common in both numbers and conversation. In the modern space, a free ad-supported port by Moborix called TRUXTON Classic would make its way to iOS and Android in 2019, both of which are still available as of this video. It was also an inclusion as TATSUJIN in both the Egret 2 Mini and Astro City Mini V in 2022, as well as being included in the Mega Drive and Genesis 2 Mini, and presented front and center as part of Blaze Entertainment's Toaplan Arcade 1 collection for Evercade the same year. A release for II Arcade, an online-enabled download-centric home arcade system that has since been defunct, also saw release in 2022, but information on this release is so scarce it might as well not exist. Finally, an all-encompassing PC port was released on Steam by Bitwave in February 2023, alongside just a ton of other Toaplan shooters. But that's another video. This port was also made available for a cloud gaming service known as Blacknut. Tatsujin may not have been as highly rated upon release as its fondness today might indicate. Even I had serious reservations with it over the years, but things have changed and it's time to dig in and see what makes this game tick. Tatsujin, as its name implies, is a game that was designed to be very difficult, but one that fosters progress through memorization and forethought. Indeed, just going in on instinct alone will lead to a fast, merciless death and a swift game over. But with studiousness, perseverance, and a little dedication, many of the game's greatest hurdles can be overcome rather comfortably. As far as shmups from the late 80s are concerned, Tatsujin is a pretty straightforward game with little in the way of complicated systems or mechanics. At its most basic, it has 8-way controls like you'd expect, and only 2 inputs, one for the Super Fighter's main weapons and one for the ever-popular skull-adorned Tatsujin bomb, known in the West as the Destroyer bomb. There are 3 flavors to the Super Fighter's main weapons. The default gun is known as the normal shot, or the power shot in the West. It's an all-purpose machine gun that has a slight spread to its fire, and does less damage than other weapons, which is handy in certain situations. Green pickups will enable the Tatsujin beam, also known as the TRUXTON beam. This green linear shot cuts through pretty much anything in its path with a high degree of power, though its lateral reach is somewhat limited. Finally, blue will bestow the fan-favorite Tatsujin laser, or thunder laser as it's known in the West. With just 1 beam to start, it can grow to an impressive 5, making for a weapon with exceptional screen coverage. In the case of mid-bosses and stage-end bosses, these lasers will also lock onto and track their targets once they make contact, allowing for a fair degree of freedom to move about the screen to avoid enemy fire. With all of this in mind, red weapon pickups will change any other weapon to the basic normal shot, if needed. All of these weapons have 3 progressively more powerful forms that can be achieved by picking up power-up parts, aka power boosters, but their effects won't be immediate. Rather than increasing in power with each one collected, a total of 5 are needed to go up just 1 level, indicated with a red pickup rather than the 4 gray ones that precede it. A total of 10 are required for full power, at which point no more will spawn, and if you die, you're left with nothing, only to have to start from scratch. Of course, a well-placed Tatsujin bomb can be used to get out of a dicey situation, but care should be taken as its area of effect is localized rather than screen filling. Extra bombs are rather common through the item cycle in Tatsujin, and some areas even present opportunities to max out the bomb stock in quick fashion. Starting out, the Super Fighter can be pretty slow, but speed-up parts are regularly dropped as well, increasing the Super Fighter through 5 levels of speed. To be honest, there is a point where it gets to be too fast, but over time, I felt that it could be acclimated to. There are times where blistering speed in a macro dodge is perhaps a better situation to be rather than poking along for a dicey micro dodge. Once again though, if you die, all of this speed is bled away, resulting in a super sluggish ship in what is often a speedy, hostile area. However, one neat aspect to Tatsujin is how the hitbox of the Super Fighter changes with lateral movement. As it turns, its hitbox will actually become more narrow, with results you'd expect. Pretty neat. Anyway, the easy thing to say would probably be, well, just don't die, but this is Truxton. Pretty much all of the standard bullet fire you're going to encounter here is aimed directly at your ship. Even if it looks static, it really isn't. And some sort of evasion will often be required, with some exceptions of course. But death will eventually happen whether you like it or not, because the game never really ends. It can go as long as you can, and it gets vicious. If not in the first loop, then definitely in another of the infinitely looping 5-stage sets you'll blast your way through until the game inevitably overwhelms you. When you do, and you will, you'll be kicked back to one of several checkpoints. Care should be taken too, as dying immediately again will send you back even further. Rooting a game like Tatsujin can absolutely help though. In the end, there isn't much in the line of variety when it comes to the enemies you'll be up against. Only a handful really, but Tatsujin makes up for this with a wide variety of mid-boss formations and fairly memorable stage-end bosses. A lot of these encounters have some kind of trick to them that requires a calm approach and a steady hand, especially at speed. Knowing what weapons to use at what points in the game will also allow not only a certain amount of comfort and familiarity, but also extra lives. Several of these tokushu, or special, capsules can be shot with fire of their applicable color for a bonus life, if you know when to grab or keep the weapons required. Additionally, all of the items that result from destroying their applicable option boxes follow a very specific order. You can often plan ahead and know exactly where certain speed, power, and weapon drops will occur even after death, though the item order does reset when you respawn. If you can keep it up long enough though, this order of items will eventually culminate into the rare 2-up item, which typically drops in Stage 3 if all goes well. But there are also some punishment traps too. Like in Stage 2 for example, this group of enemies will fire their shots right past you if you hold your position, so long as you have normal shots or the Tatsujin beam in play. If you have the Tatsujin laser equipped, this happens. Punishment. Another aspect to pay attention to is the music. There are a lot of enemies and waves that at first seem to time suspiciously well to the music playing in each stage, almost in an orchestrated fashion. In actuality, lead programmer and composer Masahiro Yuge created Tatsujin by imagining the music while placing the enemies, so this tracks. In the end, getting through the game's initial loop is something that feels pretty good, even if another credit or two is needed to actually get there. Getting further and further in after discovering little tricks and executing daring attacks, it's something that a lot of modern shooters don't really have anymore. Maybe I'm just old, but I gotta say, this ultra dadly dad shmup strikes an excellent balance, and maybe, just maybe, it's actually not as hard as its outward veneer or reputation on the outset might suggest. Of course, I'm saying this knowing full well that a ton of lives are going to make things a lot more palatable for the first credit of things, and getting there is, in itself, pretty simple. Just stay alive and kill everything you can. By default, the first extend occurs at 70,000 points, something that is easily achievable by the midway point of Stage 1. The next happens every 200,000 points, and this is where things get risky. Do you play things safe and move at a more comfortable rate in an effort not to collide with an errant enemy? Or do you whip around the screen with reckless abandon in an effort to rack up points like they're going out of style? Because when maximum speed is achieved, every speed pickup that drops is worth a tantalizing 5,000 points apiece. A huge amount in this context that can rocket you right through several extends in a couple key places, like in Stage 3. The same goes for weapons. Collecting a weapon of the same color doesn't increase its power, but it does give you, that's right, 5,000 points. This outweighs multiple pickups of other colors by a significant margin, so keeping with something comfortable and changing over only when needed can assist greatly in grabbing yet another life. Speaking of Stage 3, there will be times where bomb max will be reached, but some bombs may exist on the playfield. Normally, these won't appear when the stock is maxed, but they too will be worth 5,000 points. The choice is yours, but in the end, combined with the other 1-up and 2-up items, even lower intermediate players will have a very good chance of making it through to the final areas, and a high position on the leaderboards. There's an undeniable something about the presentation of arcade Tatsujin that really can't be ignored. On the one hand, it's, a space shooter in space with a spaceship against space aliens, right? What more is there? Well, how about the game taking place over a series of asteroids? It's a neat idea, a huge alien force on a series of giant space rocks, and something, well, not really overtly stated, that we've seen before to a lesser extent in games like Star Force. Once again, when it comes to the visuals, while there isn't a ton of enemy variety, there is an abundance of creative mid-bosses and pretty memorable stage bosses to deal with. There's a good amount of animation on the player ship, a decent amount of detail on the backdrops and stage elements, good parallax in places, and of course, cool weapon effects. There is a small issue with visibility in Stage 5 though, but otherwise shots are pretty stark against the darker backdrops. The sound is where things get really good though. Like many of Toaplan's other games, you can tell instantly where Tatsujin came from just by hearing its music. It's also clearly a source of great pride for Masahiro Yuge, quoted by Blaze Entertainment as saying, quote, "I think this is the game where I could express myself the most," end quote. Obviously, everything we've seen here up until now has been from the arcade version of the game. Between Tatsujin and TRUXTON, minor differences between each region exist, including the length of the name entry on the top player screen and the title image. Difficulty options do exist and are controlled by dip switches right on the board, allowing for a fairer or more punishing game depending on how many coins the operators wanted to pry from players' hands. I'd say the biggest obstacle in arcade TRUXSUJIN is obviously that there's no rapid fire. You have to press the button every time you want to crack off a shot, and this can lead to some frightening swelling, stiffness, and pain in folks with aging joints like your boy here. Double finger tapping helps, but there's only so much of that anyone can take. Thankfully, the Tatsujin laser is a holdable attack requiring that the button merely be held rather than tapped. With its general power and great range, it's an ideal weapon when playing on a cab. I wonder if rapid fire is even a thing that could have been implemented on original arcade hardware. Certainly a machine like an Astro City or Egret 2 have the buttons, but it also would have had to been present on the board, so there is that. Arcade Tatsujin was a big success in Japan, but it wasn't really a huge deal in the West when it first hit the scene. It wouldn't be until much later that, just with many other critically overlooked games at the time, modern players would really truly appreciate its simple, if brutally difficult, charm. Generally speaking, though, it's not even really the arcade version folks talk most about these days. Truxton at home seems to be what really captured players' hearts. If you were a fan of Toaplan shooting games but you wanted to play them at home, the Mega Drive had you covered. Tatsujin would obviously make the jump to Sega's 16-bit home console, and while there are very clear differences between it and its arcade predecessor, Tatsujin on Mega Drive is surprisingly faithful to its source material. Several changes have been implemented here though, and giving players immediate access to several difficulty levels was just the tip of the iceberg. The space iceberg. With Toaplan themselves heading up the port and Sega publishing the end result, the entire game had to be completely rebuilt with new sprites and tiles thanks to hardware limitations and a narrower color palette. In an effort to keep the aspect ratio more or less the same, a large status bar was also added that kept track of the player's score, bombs, lives, and power items. On the topic of power though, Mega Drive Tatsujin allows for extra power to be stored post-max, allowing for up to 2 power levels to be regained after death. This would also be seen to a lesser extent in the PC Engine version as well. In general, the weaponry is also the same, with the Tatsujin beam and Tatsujin laser translating over intact. However, a major change was made to the red normal shots, where instead of a whole whack of extra bullets being flung around at max power, a psychedelic spinning rainbow-colored barrier would spin around the right and left sides of the Super Fighter instead. This allows for great coverage versus enemy ships, so in crowded spots or in places where an enemy could appear at the bottom of the screen, the player might not need to worry about their speed quite as much. However, as a trade-off, these barriers will not defend against enemy bullets. Shockingly, each area is represented in an almost one-to-one fashion, despite completely different sprites being used to construct the game. This meant that experience from the arcade game could be directly applied to the Mega Drive version and, as my own experience shows, even vice versa to an extent. The end result is a game that looks different enough that it's obviously not the arcade version, plays differently in the case of red normal shots, yet maintains a layout and flow that almost matches the original game shot for shot, and I'm here for that. The greatest addition by far, though, is mapping rapid fire to the Mega Drive's C button. No better feature could have been asked for. However, there is one major issue with Tatsujin on Mega Drive, and I think it's pretty obvious. The music here is way too fast. According to Masahiro Yuge, they, quote, didn't receive any instructions from Sega on the sound hardware until 2 weeks before the mastering deadline, end quote. As a result of rushing to get the coding done, a way faster tempo was the unfortunate result, since the sound was coded for a slower clock speed. For reference, the Mega Drive in Japan runs at 60 Hz. Some folks like this rush feel, but honestly, I'm not especially keen on it. Compared to the arcade version, this is especially rough, given the much harsher FM sound on the Mega Drive's Yamaha YM2612. One other addition is a number of endings, which change depending on the loop completed, up to the 5th loop, after which game over occurs. If nothing else, this edition is quite rewarding. The Sega Mega Drive exists in North America as the Sega Genesis, and like its Japanese counterpart, it's an NTSC machine, meaning it too runs at 60 Hz. This essentially makes Truxton on the Genesis exactly the same as its Japanese Tatsujin counterpart, with the exception of its now changed title screen. Bits of lore found in the instruction booklets paint an interesting picture of the events leading up to the mission you take on in this game, and while the Japanese version has some great nuance to its plot and some fantastic art, I can't really get over how in the Western versions you're Tom the Bomb, named after the spooky scary destroyer bomb. It's pretty funny. Anyway, TRUXTON on Genesis was also published by Sega in 1989, and it's all one-to-one with regards to control, visuals, and its rush sound. However, it also holds an interesting secret. It has the Japanese TATSUJIN living inside of it. Sega Genesis and Japanese Mega Drive cartridges have very different shapes, and while you can't physically put a Japanese Mega Drive game into a Genesis without really buggering up your Genesis, you can put a Genesis cartridge into a Japanese Mega Drive with no issues. It's as simple as putting it in and switching it on. North American TRUXTON displays as Japanese TATSUJIN on the Japanese console. Nifty. Between the Japanese and North American versions of the game, TATSUJIN and TRUXTON on Sega's 16-bit home console are actually quite tame and offer what could be described as the easiest versions of the game. So what about Europe? Well, Sega also published TRUXTON to the Mega Drive in European territories in 1990. Knowing that the Mega Drive in Europe operates at only 50 Hz, due to the PAL standard, I knew I had to buy it on a hunch. And wouldn't you know it, the music actually plays at the right speed. In so many cases, European versions of games have often been criticized as being inferior to their NTSC counterparts. But I gotta say, this is a very clear exception. As it stands, TRUXTON on a PAL Mega Drive holds a clear edge over its two alter egos, purely on sound alone. Check it out. The challenge here is also identical to that of the NTSC versions of the game, albeit with a negligibly choppier 50Hz refresh rate. Not a big issue. And in case you're wondering, yes, the PAL version does have Japanese TATSUJIN as well. Oh, but that's not all. Longtime viewers know that I have a soft spot for the PC Engine, and I've taken a look at a few games by Toaplan on the PC Engine side of things long ago. When I learned about the PC Engine version of TATSUJIN, I had to see if it was something I needed, and yeah, it had to happen. PC Engine TATSUJIN is stunningly close to the arcade version with regards to its sprites, power-ups, placement, and flow, but it's also a little truncated due to the full 4:3 aspect ratio employed to display it. This loss of vertical height, paired with snappy, fast bullets, makes TATSUJIN on PC Engine perhaps the hardest version of the game. It also feels as if the weapons here lack a bit of the punch that those in the arcade and Mega Drive space exhibit, making things feel maybe just a little harder than they ought to be. A few concessions have also been made for the PC Engine version, especially given that it resides on a HUE card. There is less animation overall to the player ships and enemies. Its sound effects do leave a bit to be desired. However, TATSUJIN on PC Engine has an epic advantage, one that outweighs all of this when it comes down to its music. TRUXTON's music was great before, but the PC Engine version of TATSUJIN is just transcendent with the excellent percussion accompanying it. Sure, it's no FM sound, but you just can't argue with these dulcet tones, especially in Stage 5. The PC Engine version does have some neat options as well, though a little legwork is gonna be needed. If all you need is the basics, just hold the select button and press run. But if you want a whole whack of extra options, play the game until you hit 7,100 points, reset the game, then access the options again. All kinds of great options are now unlocked. It's here that I usually tweak the game in a very specific way. I'll set the extend scores to 500,000 for the first, which yes is a big ask, but every subsequent extend triggers at only 50,000 additional points. What a great trade-off. With regards to 2-up items, they're much easier to obtain in this version as well. Insofar as I can tell, so long as you don't die in the stages they're in, opening the special capsules that normally hold a 1-up item will have a 2-up item instead. Finally, Tatsujin on PC Engine also features its own unique ending, which displays before the second loop of the game starts in. Maybe I'm just biased, but the PC Engine is where I really fell in love with Truxton, and if you have the means to do it, any way you can really, you owe it to yourself to scope this one out. This isn't a review, but dang, do I love this version of the game. Truxton today is as accessible as ever to play regardless of how you go about it. Grabbing an old Mega Drive or Genesis and loose cartridge can be done on the cheap, relatively speaking, but on modern equipment, it's even easier. But maybe not better. For the low cost of nothing, you can get your arcade Truxton kicks with Truxton Classic on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store from Mudprints. Granted, as a free-to-play mobile game, there are a few trappings like earning and spending gems to make things easier, unlocking harder difficulties by beating easier ones, and of course the aforementioned ads you'll need to sit through. But if you don't mind a loss of various features like leaderboards and achievements, you can just throw your device into airplane mode and play without having to worry about any of that. Shh, that's a pro tip. Anyway, just as with the iOS version of Dodonpachi Blissful Death, playing Truxton with direct touch control is an interesting experience. For example, despite one-to-one movement relative to your finger on the touchscreen, speed-up modules still exist here, and they do not affect the rate of your movement in the slightest. This means that you can collect as many of them as you want for a ton of points and a bajillion lives. Again, in Stage 3, what up? All while being able to fine-tune your movement to the pixel in tight patterns. Nothing to it. Heck, even if you die, recovery is a snap because it's so super easy to get around and out of the way. Can't be mad at that. The one thing I do have a gripe about is that sometimes if I go too far to the edge of the screen, I can lose control of my ship and my hand can sometimes get in the way of things coming from the bottom of the screen. But again, Truxton is all about learning from these kinds of mistakes, so it's kind of a non-issue in the end. But on an iPad in particular, the image is also very soft and blurry with no way to sharpen it up. On my phone, a Galaxy Z Fold 3, it's more of the same on the internal screen. And while it looks much better on the narrower outer screen, the bomb button blocks a huge swath of the bottom of the screen. A traditional smartphone might be better in this regard. If you can stand the interruptions of ads and such, you can also enable leaderboards and achievements for even more to do, and earned gems can assist with a quick full power-up as well. The Taito Egret 2 Mini is a cool little device that has a ton of neat games on it. It also has a screen that can be rotated through 90 degrees, allowing for Tate games to be played in the correct aspect ratio while taking up the whole screen. Perfect for a game like Tatsujin. This particular version allows for a bunch of settings to be tweaked through virtual dip switches, such as difficulty, lives, and extend scores. It even has 3 save state slots, which is sure to help in tackling tricky areas, or just cheesing your way through the game as the case may be. Playing on a miniature arcade cabinet is neat and all, but the Egret 2 Mini also has decent HDMI out capabilities. However, the shimmery scaling is kind of rough and the picture is a little washed out. Imperfect scaling is far from the worst thing about Tatsujin on the Egret Mini 2 though. It also exhibits a decent amount of input delay, making for a very slippery experience. It's definitely not ideal. Meanwhile, oh. No, that's another video. So yeah, speaking of not ideal, the Astro City Mini V with its extra lagged out controls does Tatsujin no favors whatsoever. This is as slippery as it gets, unfortunately, and neither the built-in controls nor the specialized gamepad made specifically for it can outweigh the sheer delay experienced between button press and action on screen. On the plus side, options do exist here for various dip switch settings, and there are also save states, but this time there's only 2. Once again, the scaling is rough, and the HDMI out on the Astro City Mini V is a little on the washed out side, so this is really just a fancy conversation starter and nothing more. If you're gonna play Tatsujin, this should be the last one you consider. On the other side of things, I've been nothing but impressed with the Evercade's excellent ecosystem. As an owner of every system and every cartridge produced so far, you better believe that I was excited to see that Toaplan was going to represent with not one but two arcade collections in conjunction with Blaze Entertainment's Tate-equipped handheld, the Evercade EXP. I haven't noticed it in previous games, but TRUXTON does exhibit a slight input delay. Not as extreme as the Egret 2 Mini or the Astro City Mini V, but it is definitely here, and it is slightly slipperier than I would have liked. But I did get all of my footage for the arcade section from the Evercade Versus using a Hori Rep 5 Hayabusa stick, so it can't be all that bad. Well, it almost was, actually. There are no options to tweak dip switch settings here, so no difficulty rebalance, no extend tweaking, no extra lives, nothing. What you do get instead is control mapping, neat, and a couple of other modes like coin limits and a competition mode where a very stringent set of limitations are put into place to standardize competitive scores on the Evercade in specific. Also neat. Oh, and TRUXTON on Evercade also allows for 6 save states, including a quick save slot, allowing for a good amount of cheese and practice locations if needed. All in all, not a terrible port, but it could definitely have been better because the rapid fire option here is super weak. It's so slow. Thankfully, my stick has an acceptably snappy turbofire function, so I had that covered. It's totally possible that Blaze Entertainment will update either their Evercade systems or create a patch for the cartridges that will enable dip switch settings in the future. Hopefully that comes to pass. But hey, can we talk about how solid the Sega Mega Drive 2 Mini is when it comes to its input speed? It felt shockingly good, which is absolutely a step up from what I saw with the original Mega Drive and Genesis Mini back in 2009. I got the European version of the Mega Drive 2 Mini for this production, but the included TRUXTON is actually the 60Hz NTSC version. This comes as no real surprise, since all three of the hardware units, regardless of the region, are basically identical to each other outside of stenciling, button colors, and, in the case of the Japanese variant, the fake cartridge slot. Anyway, this means that TRUXTON is going to have the same rushed music that we saw in the Japanese and North American versions. However, an option for arcade sound is present, which slows the music to a much more reasonable speed as found in the original PAL carts for the Mega Drive proper. As a side note, just as with the titles on the original Genesis and Mega Drive Minis, the Japanese Tatsujin is also present when the language is changed to Japanese. Bonus! Last, but certainly not least, we have the very latest in TRUXSUJIN releases, the 2023 port of TRUXTON for Windows, Linux, and Mac PCs on Steam from Bitwave. It's also SteamOS and Steam Deck compatible, giving it a super solid portable edge. Now, we're going to get this out of the way real quick. TRUXTON on Steam sounds terrible. There's a very pronounced squeal to some of the sound effects, and whole sections of the rather poorly represented music is also completely absent. A lot of the punch has been lost. But with that out of the way, this could be the best way to play arcade TRUXTON, or Tatsujin if you prefer. 4 different arcade versions are presented here, after all, outside of getting a PCB. You know, sound notwithstanding. Here's the thing, with all of the other emulated versions we've seen between the Egret 2 Mini and the Astro City Mini V and the Evercade in general, all of them exhibit delay of some kind. But not this. This is snappy, essentially instant. It's also highly compatible with a number of sticks. I used the Hori Fight Stick Alpha for PlayStation 5 and I completely rocked its socks into the second loop. There are a ton of really cool features here, not the least of which start with all kinds of quality of life improvements. We're talking variable rapid fire, we're talking gameplay assists like health, variable hitbox, and auto dodge, which isn't infallible, I promise. There's even a screen mode that widens the playfield, allowing for a full view of the stage without the horizontal scroll that normally accompanies normal play. There are 10 save states, giving players extreme flexibility with which to practice even outside of the robust practice mode. There are achievements, widgets, cool wallpapers, neat CRT features, online leaderboards, and of course, Tate rotation options. Really, if they could fix the sound, this could easily have been the absolute best way to play arcade TRUXTON pretty much ever. But alas, we may have to wait for M2's inevitable Shot Trigger's Toaplan Garage to really bring it all home. Someday maybe. Until then though, I'm sure I can deal with the iffy sound as I nab all 50 achievements while I wait. Over the years, Tatsujin would transform from a formidable beast of a game to one that could be rather easily overcome. And honestly, I could see how this happened in an accelerated manner. Just within the time frame of producing this video, I went from being crushed in Stage 1 all the way through to the second loop in just one credit. And well, again, TRUXTON wasn't as popular in the West as it was in Japan. That has obviously changed, and its legacy is fairly profound. A great many titles were influenced and inspired by Tatsujin over the years, and a number of other games would cameo and make reference to it as well, including Game Tengoku Cruiser Mix Special and Trouble Witch's Final. Some even draw inspiration from it, such as 2020's Crisis Wing. There's even a new forthcoming entry in the series, in the form of Tatsujin Extreme, coming to the PlayStation 5. Heck, it's even the reason I got a PS5. Overall, I have to admit, Tatsujin and TRUXTON really do stand the test of time, and while the challenge presented in all of the versions we've seen has inherent limits, it's a game I'll definitely work towards perfecting, especially if, no, when, a more solid version is released by M2 in the Shot Triggers line. In the meantime, Tatsujin is very likely a game I'll always return to, particularly on PC Engine, just as with other games like Airzonk, Galaga 88, and 1943 Kai. With ships of red, blue, and green, it would most certainly seem that we want TRUXTON. Whoa, those were some back-to-back chonkers of an episode, but I have something even more extreme in mind if things go smoothly with this one. So be sure to drop a like, or a dislike if you really mean it, and subscribe if you haven't already for more exceptional quality STG features made for only the finest viewers. But also, let's get these subs up. More importantly though, be sure to share this with someone you think will like it, even if they don't agree that Tatsujin on PC Engine is a work of sublime art. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all in the next feature.